This is Carla Atherton, Director of the Healthy Family Formula and host and producer of the Children's Health Summit 4. In response to the rapid rise in conditions such as autism, cancer, ADHD, gastrointestinal distress, anxiety, depression, asthma, skin conditions, learning disabilities, and autoimmunity, the topic of this year's summit is preventing and reversing childhood chronic illness. And today I'm very excited to be interviewed by one of my brilliant Healthy Family Formula family health coach trainees, Sutton Healy. So Sutton, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is such an honor to be a part of the summit. It's so great to be working with you, Carla. And I originally started working with families as a special education teacher. And in that process, I realized there was a great need to work with kids on a more integrative level. So I've pursued a few certificates in health, as well as I'm currently completing my marriage and family therapy, medical specialty licensure, so that I can work with whole families and kids with any conditions, as well as adults and kids alike with autoimmunity. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of this summit.
And I just have to say thank you to Sutton for doing this. Again, one of my brilliant trainees, but she has been like a very active part of our group. And to have someone with Sutton's background join our team is just fantastic, because she comes from, well, she has a lot of different things that she's really good at, but always, contributing and a lot of really interesting things and questions to say, and she pushes me like a lot, pushes me to get my stuff done so that, because she's always right on my tail. So Sutton, thanks so much for being here and for doing this and taking on this challenge to interview me today. And I'm going to let you take it away.
Oh, yeah. My pleasure. And one thing I'd like to say is I think we're both lifelong learners, and that pursuit to gather as much information as possible to work the best we can with the information that we know. I think we share that as a mutual personality trait, I should say, because I feel like as much as I'm researching things and learning about things, that I see you posting things that I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I was totally interested in that. So we have a similar personality, just this drive for information. So that's kind of fun to share that with you. And speaking of which, today you are going to be talking about type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited about this because it is an area and topic that I personally would like to learn much more about. So if we could start with that, I'd love to know about your family story around type 1 diabetes and why it is such an important topic for you.
Well, yeah, I think, some people know this about me who've been on my newsletter list for a while, or, have heard any of my talks before. But if you haven't, my introduction, well, not really an introduction, but my plunging into the deep waters of functional medicine and care of people and families that kind of went beyond the medical model came when my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2012. So it'd be February 2nd, 2012. And that was at that time I was really I was working at a university, online and as well as in person here in locally, as well as online, and I was steeped in academics and that kind of thing, and I was always really interested in health, like critical thinking, spiritual stuff. I was practicing yoga, and I would bike, and I was very active with my children. We were out in nature all the time. But my ideas about health, and I was interested in health, I thought I fed them well. I thought we did a lot of things right. I knew we did a lot of things not so right, but I felt that the things we did right would kind of outweigh the stuff that we weren't really doing that were not conducive to health. Let's just put it that way. So when she was diagnosed, and I sort of went into that, like more doctor's visits, like we didn't, we just kind of would see doctors if we needed to, right? But then it was like, there was more of that. We, entered the hospital. We had to go there. We were, told like, that we had to go to the hospital right away so that we could get her blood sugar level stable and learn all these things from the professionals at the hospital. So what I did learn was what not to do. No offense, but so what we got there, we were told like, okay, this is how you read labels. Like this was our nutrition education, was that you read the labels and you find out how many carbs are in there and you dial up, well, not dial up. At the time, she didn't have a pump. So you injected as much insulin to meet the carbs in that particular food. And so this was like the calculation, and this was all math, right? Like diabetes was math. And for me, I thought, okay. And then, we were getting pamphlets. We were handed pamphlets like, this is how many carbs are in, a donut. And this is how many carbs are in all these different McDonald's items. Like, not even kidding. And I thought, should I be feeding my child McDonald's who has type 1 diabetes? Okay. So, and then all these things, and I said, well, okay. So, and then I asked the pediatric endocrinologist, how much does glycemic index have to do with blood sugar control? And he said nothing. And then if anybody knows what glycemic index is, I'll explain that really quickly. Glycemic index is the rate at which your blood sugar will rise in response to a specific food. So it's like, how fast does a food turn into sugar? And it's like, are you mainlining the sugar, or are you just kind of letting it release over time? Well, some foods, you're mainlining the sugar, you're eating white flour, that's like, or you've eaten table sugar, or if you've eaten, like those sorts of foods, like juice, like there's no fiber to slow it down. It's turned into sugar pretty darn quick. And so he told me nothing. That had nothing to do with how well you can control blood sugar. The child in the next bed was eating Fruit Loops. So I just went, then she had to stay for a few days in the hospital over that weekend. And so I was making homemade soup right from the get-go. Like I went, this is wrong. I knew it was wrong. And I was just like, we're going to have to learn on our own what to do. So we got home, I opened up this cupboard, and I was like, bunch of junk in there, took all the junk out, put all the stuff like the sharp bin and the needles and I just made a space for us to be able to have all our stuff there. And I started to get organized. Because this is kind of how like my crazy brain works. Like, okay, get organized, Carla, because this is not going to be easy, but it will be easier if you're organized. And, so that's what we did. And so I started out with some really interesting materials that I was being introduced to. Then I started reading like Dr. Bernstein's book. And then I read everything actually at that point that was more, I guess, an exploratory, or a functional view of what diabetes actually is. And so I learned a lot, like, let's just put it that way. And then I started to get designations, kind of like you, Sutton, like I just started getting this designation and that designation, and, and became a family health coach and started working with Epidemic Answers on some of their work that they were doing. And I actually led my first summit probably a year into my daughter's diagnosis. So just really curious about it. So I won't go on and on. I'm sorry. That was a really long story, but that's sort of how I came to start. That's just the beginning. And from what I've learned, though, I really can't wait to share with you. So I'm going to stop with my story, and then we can get on with some of the other stuff. But needless to say, I'm interested because this is my daughter, right? This is her life, her, this is what she's going through. So that's why I was very interested. And didn't really stop there, but I'm going to stop there.
Well, I know personally with kids of my own that is how you really delve into health, is because you don't love anything more than your kids. And so It makes a lot of sense that you started as this like renegade mom. I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to figure it out what's best for my daughter. So having said that, in your learning about type 1 diabetes, can you kind of go into what it is specifically and what happens to the body with type 1 diabetes?
Okay, sure. Well, when we talk about diabetes, quite often in mainstream, like people are like, okay, deal with your diabetes, blah, blah, blah. This is the diabetes diet, blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of times they're talking about the type 2 diabetes, which is a diabetes that you develop, which is an inability to basically use sugar in the body, right? Like it's so the sugar builds up in the bloodstream to toxic levels. And so with type 2 diabetes, that happens because the body has been sort of, I guess, mistreated, bad diet, a lifestyle stuff. And then the body, with that influx of sugar all the time, the body is always trying to make insulin to shuttle that sugar into the cell. Now, when you have type 2 diabetes, what has happened is that your body is not able to do it anymore. It's like a hit capacity. This cell is not opening up anymore for that sugar, and so I'm ignoring that insulin. No, that lock doesn't work anymore. So insulin will build up. Insulin just doesn't work to do its job anymore, and so the blood sugar, like the sugar in the blood, builds up to toxic levels, and so that's why, and then it damages organs. So that's why people who have uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, they have, can have like amputations of their feet because they get neuropathy, because they, there's no, there's just this toxic buildup of sugar. They get like nerve damage. And so, it really is really hard on the heart, on the brain. Future people who have type 2 diabetes have, a pretty good chance of having some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's later in life because of the effect it has on the brain. It's very toxic. So, all of the organs. I mean, I could list them all, but what's the point? Because all of the organs, the eyes especially too, are very susceptible to damage because they're very sensitive. The eyes are actually one of the first things to be damaged or to, notice any sort of change. So that's type 2. But then type 1 is actually an autoimmune, or how we understand autoimmune at this time. I'm sure that's going to keep changing as the years go by, but how we understand it at this point is that the body actually has a self-attack. So the beta cells are actually being attacked by your own immune system. And so the beta cell is what the actual cell in the pancreas, the islets of Langerhans, and in the islet cell, they cannot actually, they're being damaged or killed, and so they cannot actually produce enough insulin or any insulin to shuttle the sugar into the cell, right? So then again, the result is the same though. So that there's too much sugar in the bloodstream, and that comes to toxic levels, get very sick. And people can have, actually obviously can die from type 1 diabetes or even type 2, depending on, how uncontrolled that blood sugar is. So with type 1, there's an autoimmune response. Now, the body could be attacking the beta cells, or it could be attacking insulin itself. So, and sometimes both. And then also it can be cross-reactive too. So this is something that not a lot of people know, but this is why I'm always looking when I work with people who have type 1, is if there's a reactivity to milk. And often we just take out milk because casein A1B actually is a protein that is cross-reactive with the beta cell. So if you're eating, I mean, theoretically, and also, what actually happens is if you're eating dairy, this could potentially be causing the body to mistake that protein, or mistake the beta cell with that protein. And so it's attacking its own beta cells, thinking that it is this foreign substance that it doesn't like. So that's type 1. Type 1 is this autoimmune problem, and so we're always making cells all the time, but we can't keep up. The body can't keep up with the amount of cells that are being actually killed by its own immune system. So at some point, we need the body to clear out old cells. We need to have a certain amount of antibodies, and that's normal. And that's why there's a normal range. But if we create more antibodies, we're tagging more cells than we actually are making. That's when we have tissue damage and organ damage. Like those things that cause malfunction, right? Because we don't have enough. The organ is actually either damaged too much to actually perform its function, or it's starting to actually cause more of this. And actually causes inflammation. So, you have bad knees because of rheumatoid arthritis, or, you have scleroderma, so the skin is actually kind of hardening, or the organs are hardening. You have type 1 because all your, beta cells or most of them are dead, right? So that's the difference. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, thank you for just explaining that. I would like to better understand the difference between how you might approach type 1 diabetes compared to, like you mentioned in the hospital, the kid next door was eating Fruit Loops and you just knew in your gut that was not right. And so in terms of how you worked with your daughter through this, can you explain what you would do, your approach compared to the standard care that's offered in the allopathic model?
I know I sound like such a jerk. I'm sorry, but it was just so wrong, and it just makes me crazy. I'm sorry, it makes me crazy because the amount of like the wrong information really puts our children's health at risk. Like these kids can have a lifetime of problems being taught this crap. Like it's not, we shouldn't be protecting our right to eat junk food and, oh, poor me, our life's going to change now because we can't have everything convenient. Like, come on. I mean, I think that is the worst thing to teach parents. And then parents often, if they're not as curious or annoying as I am, which I'm sorry, I'm a self-proclaimed annoying 4-year-old asking questions and, like tugging on people's, shirt sleeve or whatever. I mean, I just do that, but not everybody does that. And we also can feel like we can't do that. We're not allowed to ask questions because I've been walked out on in a doctor's office because we asked for a certain test that literally cost $35 and he told us that we wasted the system's money. And I was like, what do you mean? We need to investigate this stuff. Oh yes, he walked out on us. It was terrible. And then it creates white coat syndrome in our children because they don't want to go see these practitioners that, it's so, I know I sound like I'm being a wiener, but I can't help myself. I just really have to say that we have to ask these questions because I look at it very differently than the standard of care. So, and I see many, many parents look at me with that look in their eye and they just think like, it's something you can't miss. You just can't miss it. They're tired but they also feel like this is it. Like this is all there is. And they've sort of resigned themselves to the fact that there's nothing else. But I'm here to tell you there is. So my approach to type 1, I start with the basics, right? I start with what is it that in the lifestyle that is an issue here or could be a causal factor, because always we're looking for root cause resolution. And that's why I really appreciate the functional model of medicine, or of health, I guess, not medicine even necessarily, but the functional model of health, because we're looking at the body as a bunch of systems. They all affect each other. We're not looking at like the GI system or the brain or the endocrine system. We're looking at all of these things at the same time because they all affect each other. So we're also looking for root causes. And some people say, well, why would you look for the root cause of type 1? You got it. What's the point of knowing? You're just going to feel bad about this and that. No, the point of knowing the root cause is not to feel bad or regret anything. It's to find out what happened. And then if you can find out what happened, you can potentially fix that. Right? Because if you're finding out that you've got a ton of mold in your house, right, that could be a causal factor, and that your child had, HHV or something like, or EBV, which is Epstein-Barr virus, which is like one of the herpetic viruses that many people have. And nobody has to be shy about that because that's a very common thing because we are, human beings, right? Pass it on. And, or maybe there was something in that vaccine that was an irritant for the immune system. Maybe there was gut health problems. These things we need to know because then we can say, okay, now we can fix it and then optimize this child's chance at either, preventing any comorbidities, which we can talk about later too, Sutton, which is, that this is one reason why we need to find out root causes because it doesn't only necessarily just cause type 1 diabetes. It can cause miscarriage for later in life. Like I was saying, Alzheimer's, dementia, or other autoimmune conditions that can come because this inflammation has not been dampened. So if we just leave it, keep living the same lives, keep doing the same things that we're doing, we just have a worsening of health, and we ignore the fact that we can actually get a lot better, if not all the way. So that's my approach. My approach is multifactorial. It's looking at every child, every person as an individual, but still starting with the basics, right? We still are going to be doing what are you eating? What are you doing with your day? Are you exercising? Get enough sun? Do you get enough sleep? We're still starting with the basics because most of the time, none of us we're not doing those things, even the basic things, right? Especially the diet.
Yeah.
Right? Like the diet is like the one thing people don't want to let go of. They don't want to do it. And I just think it's all because we're just taught that, right? Like it's just, we're taught that. So we think this and it's like, but if you actually stop and think about it, you're like, why do I care about that? Like, why is that such a big deal? And why am I so worried that my kids aren't going to eat that? Because we're dealing with something a lot bigger than you know, having maybe some kind of like disappointment in the house because we're not buying that food anymore, right? Like that will pass. So anyway, that's my approach. My approach
Or,
is factorial. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no. I was gonna say, or as a busy mom, because
Yeah.
I understand, you think, I got to go from this place to this place. Where can I stop as
Yeah.
a quick meal? And you think, well, I packed in a healthy lunch today, so it's okay if we have a somewhat unhealthy dinner. But when it comes down to it, when you have somebody in your household that might suffer something like diabetes, you really have to be proactive and thinking ahead and planning ahead. And I think the diet is often a trap of like what's available at the moment, you know, and you have a car full of crabby kids and they're all hungry and they've had long days at school and you're just like, how can I take care of this problem right now? And so, I mean, there is an attachment to diet. Certain diets, people do get attached to certain foods, but at the same time, the world is made for convenience these days. You know, there's so few people that are able to grow their own food and healthy foods and, you know, get the right sources. So I understand exactly, you know, when it comes to diet and you know, you mentioned addressing root causes, and I was curious if you would be able to say maybe a couple of root causes that you know are directly related to type 1 diabetes, because obviously diet being one of them, but you mentioned like mold or other sources of toxins or ways that it could trigger type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to talk about that. One thing I do want to say though about the diet before we move on from that, Sutton, is that like I said, I'm not here to give anybody crap, because and when I say like, why are we so attached? I'm still asking myself the same question, because it wasn't easy. And we actually did some really like extreme things because we were testing out what would work, what wouldn't, what would be the best. So we did like raw vegan even at one point, which, you know, like I wouldn't recommend that, you know, necessarily with the, you know, type 1, but, you know, we did everything. Like we tried like a lot of stuff, and it was not easy because of that, because of how, you know, how it is out there. Yeah, like you said, the world is made for convenience is so true. And so it does take a lot of strength to actually, and resolve, I guess, to you know, to do something a little bit different than that, and which is so weird because it's really just like eat out of your garden and eat some organic stuff and like, you know, eat more vegetables and, you know, a nice amount of fat, eat good fats, you know, don't eat out of a bag, box, or can, you know, make a piece of protein with your meal. Like it's really actually very simple, but it's because of this like psychology of our culture. It's really interesting how hard it really is. And I remember one time, and I'll just say that we were out shopping once, and we used to get like literally we would never get anything that was, you know, unhealthy like right at the beginning, especially. Now it's a little like things have changed a little. Not that we're getting a bunch of junk, but it's, you know, things are a little different. And we would literally go buy like an avocado and like a little bit of sea salt or whatever, and just like cut it and eat it in the park when watching my son play soccer. Like that's how hardcore we were. Like we would just, and then I remember this one time that my daughter, she wasn't like wanting other food, but she was so hungry and we couldn't find anything that would really be appropriate for her or that she actually wanted. She didn't want a piece of fruit, so she wanted something else. So we're looking through, she started crying in the grocery store. It was awful. And I'm thinking, in this bloody place, in this huge grocery store, and this kid has to be crying because there's nothing she can eat. You know, it was just like, it made me sad and angry at the same time, you know? So anyway, yeah, but I hear you. I hear parents, like it's not that, but I think the more we learn, the easier it becomes. So then you can sound like me, where I'm like, well, what's the big deal? You know, because you start learning and you start getting more empowered, and then you start cooking things and you start bringing things ahead of time, or like planning ahead, and, you know, stuff like that makes it easier. So I just wanted to say that, but
Yeah.
okay. But as far as root causes go,
And that yeah. Oh no, but you something came up when you were talking to me, and I was just thinking, not to mention the marketing and advertising that they're so good at targeting kids.
yeah,
And the colors and the cartoons and the relationship with Disney characters. Oh, we shouldn't say Disney, but characters, you know, like they know how to lure kids into their like sugars and their, you know, just the bad foods. And anyway, that's like a whole nother talk, you know, like diet and how our society is so good at brainwashing our kids to believe, you know, certain foods are what they should be eating. And anyway, let's focus on root cause.
Okay. Yes, let's do it. Okay. So there are I actually approach type 1 and the root causes of type 1 basically the same as every other chronic condition, except there are a few tweaks. Okay. There's a few like, oh, these are a little bit more, you know, red flags than others. So I'm always looking at like the immune system for sure. Like, what's it doing? Is it hyper responding or hypo? Like, you know, is it working well? And I think actually when it's type 1 or any kind of autoimmunity, it's almost like they're both at this. It's like it's not responding to specific things that it kind of should be getting rid of, but then it's targeting things that it's, why are you destroying this? So people see it as a hyper response of the immune system to have an autoimmune attack. But it's interesting because it's almost both, because one of the catalysts or one of the root causes can be infection for type 1, and especially ones that are self-infection or that are reactivated. And you know, I've been learning even so much about retroviruses, you know, lately. And Dr. Christine Schaffner is actually talking about retroviruses in one of the talks for the summit. And you know, there are several actually brilliant people that are really working on this right now. But you know, so there are retroviruses that live within us, and then they can be reactivated when we get other viruses, such as like Epstein-Barr virus or herpes virus. Or there's like 6 or 7 herpes viruses. Maybe more, herpetic viruses, probably more. But those things can actually reactivate like retroviruses, and these things can really wreak havoc on the body, and they can create this autoimmune response. And so there are other things like, you know, even parasites, anything that's going to aggravate the immune system. And then I'm also looking at toxins. Okay, so we're looking at glyphosate is the toxin of the day. Like that's the one everybody's talking about right now. Which is probably right because it's really pervasive in our environment. We can't get rid of it. We don't even know how to get rid of it. And none of us are coming out of this unscathed. Like all of us are exposed unless you live in the middle of the jungle. Even then, I don't know, you know. So it's a growing concern. Let's just put it that way. And that's another thing that can exacerbate this autoimmune cascade, this response. Food reactivity, I'm looking at that. So anything that's going to exacerbate the immune system, set it on its head. And so anything like, well, actually, what I mentioned before was casein A1B, which is a specific milk protein, right? That is cross-reactive with the pancreatic beta cells. So you could potentially be destroying the beta cells, not really meaning to, because you're eating something that is actually exacerbating your immune system saying, look, I'm trying to get rid of that, get rid of that, looks like a beta cell, and then it's get rid of the beta cells. So yeah, those are things I'm looking at. And also you said toxic mold. Yeah, that's another one, big time. And you know, so if we're looking at autoimmunity, we're always wanting to see if there's mold in the home, because that can create, again, the same thing due to toxicity. And I actually know of a doctor, and I'm not going to say who it is because that's up to them to talk about this, but who actually reversed her own type 1 diabetes because found that her catalyst was toxic mold. And this is a very well-respected doctor, and she was actually conventionally trained and then moved into functional medicine. And she did this for herself, and cured herself of all kinds of things. But this was one of them, and a few other really big health issues. So this is not crazy. Like, I mean, so people, this is one thing that I've always said to people. I'm like, you know, nobody wants to touch type 1 with a 10-foot pole. It seems, because everybody's like, shh, you know, nobody said, we don't want to touch, you know, because people are reversing like MS, they're Hashimoto's, You know, well, celiac, you know, you get off the gluten, and people don't really try to mess with that after that. But, you know, there's like RA, rheumatoid arthritis, all kinds of stuff that, you know, we kind of thought were done deals, and they're all hugely damaging, like hugely damaging autoimmune conditions, like really big time things. And nobody's really talking about type 1. So I want to talk about it. I want to do this. I want to, you know, lead the charge with this, because there's no reason why type 1 is any different than any of those other autoimmune conditions, as far as the ability to be able to first get it under control and then start reversing the process. And my theory, and I actually ran this by Stephanie Seneff, as to why not a lot of people want to, you know, talk about like this whole idea of reversal, is I believe that, you know, like, well, certain things in the body take a certain amount of time to regenerate, right? So, you know, the GI tract, it turns over in, you know, a few days, right? Like, you know, the lining of the gut, and, you know, other cells take a little bit longer. Well, I figure, you know, an organ takes a lot longer to have some kind of regeneration happen. So it takes a longer time and more dedication, and it's really tough in our environment to actually, you know, have a clean enough environment to get ahead. It's like having a little seedling, you know, and then there's wind blowing, and it's raining and hailing, and like somebody's stepping all over it. Like, you know, that's like, it's pretty hard to grow a, you know, a seedling in those conditions. So we really need to protect it and get rid of all the stuff that's bothering it and harming it. And then that's when you get rid of all the root causes, the usual suspects is what I call them. And those things like toxicity, infection, you know, environment, EMF actually is another thing, electromagnetic fields, hugely damaging to the body tissues and highly inflammatory. So anything that's causing an inflammatory response of the body. And I didn't mention heavy metals. Heavy metals is another one. For sure. And then again, you're looking at the GI, like the gut is like, we have a few speakers talking about that. The gut is majorly important in any autoimmune condition. You have to fix the gut before you can do anything else. You have to. So I think that's one reason why, you know, it's one of those topics that's really difficult for people to get their head around. It's like, well, I've never really heard of anybody reversing type 1. Well, I've heard a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people do. It's just that I think it's one of those ones that takes a bit more time. I think that's why we don't really talk about it a lot. You know, you don't see this miraculous result in like 2 weeks. Although you do see a lot of really like you see the blood sugar go down, you see all of that stuff. But, you know, it takes longer to regenerate any sort of tissue that, you know, an organ. So, okay, so those are the usual suspects. Those are the things that I'm looking for by way of root causes.
And you mentioned reversal. So essentially it's identifying root causes, eliminating whatever could be triggering, and then just rebuilding the system, like making sure that once you've eliminated, you've you know, nourish the body enough with enough of the minerals and vitamins and nutrition necessary for the immune system to kind of repair and refuel, and then hopefully you see less and less of the symptoms related to diabetes. So, I mean, like, that's how we would address most autoimmune conditions anyway. Obviously, you're saying, I agree, diabetes is probably a slower process because the tissues are already usually already somewhat damaged. So in order to regenerate tissues and cells, it will take a little bit longer, but it's so hopeful to know that there is a way, and that unfortunately our allopathic model doesn't address it. And yet there are people doing it, and it's just a matter of finding the help, or like yourself, self-teaching and, you know, kind of, I mean, obviously you want the support of a practitioner of some kind. Like, I don't think any of us recommend advocating doing things on your own. You had a background already, so you knew what you were getting yourself into, but somebody with no medical background or no knowledge of health definitely should see a practitioner to help through this process. But it's so exciting to know that that is a possibility. And I have a question, because I know some people will just automatically say that, oh, I was born with type 1 diabetes. It was something that was discovered right away, shortly after birth. Can you tell me a little bit about, like, I mean, I know that like prevention obviously is to avoid toxic exposures or things that might trigger an autoimmune condition, but like, what's the process that takes place if like a baby is born with type 1 diabetes? What's happening in utero that might trigger that?
Oh, well, I mean, if you're talking about toxins, whatever mom's exposed to, baby is too. You know, that could easily happen. And I actually know a few people, like one of them, her baby was diagnosed at, I think he was 9 months old, or I don't think it was 6. I think he was 9 months old. 6, yeah. So, you know, this happens. And I think that it's happening earlier actually now because of our environment and the environment mom's in and the baby in turn is in. I mean, the baby is part of the mom's body. You know, that baby is born with over 200 chemicals in their cord blood these days. So, yeah, I think that's easy. And I think that one thing that is really important to point out about that is that, you know, that epigenetics, right? So genetics loads the gun, right? And environment pulls the trigger. And the only reason why you're not just born with it, something triggered it. Even if it was in utero, even if you were 3 months old, you're not born with an autoimmune condition. You just aren't. You don't have, something has happened to trigger that. Because, and we all have different processes, metabolic processes, chemical, you know, all that stuff that's going on, and endocrine, all these things that are happening within the body all the time. There are pathways, there are receptors. And so, you know, we have this genetic makeup that actually, you know, kind of is like the blueprint of that. But we don't really, what we do with what we take in, like the food we eat, the exposures that we have, those things are the ones that flip those genes on and off. So we actually, so if we're exposed to something like, you know, like a chemical someone's spraying next to you for like 10 years or something like that, or it doesn't even take that long actually, especially for children, you know, that will actually flip on and off specific, you know, almost like programs, you know, in your body. It turns it on or off. And some things are good to turn on. Some things are not good to turn on. Some things are good to turn off. Some, you know, like, again, so there's always a trigger. And so that's the key. That's the job. But you were saying like finding a practitioner, or if you kind of like, you know, I had to school myself because like, there was nobody that knew what I knew. Like even still, I can't find anybody who knows more than I do, most of the time, about this, because I've really tried to. I had to. Like I had nobody to tell me this because, you know, I was just being told, you know, some stuff that wasn't really even relevant to what our situation was. So. You know, it is good. I mean, it's tough to find a practitioner, but if you can, for sure, because then they can help you do the testing. They can, if you need testing, you know, they can help you find, you know, like follow your history, the health history of your child, and then be able to help you with a plan. Now that's the biggest thing, is to have a plan. And it's not like, you know, written in stone, everything's so awful and, you know, we have to do this to the letter and oh my gosh, I'm gonna panic, you know, if things don't go right today, because I've been through all that. It was really hard, but it's really good to have somebody who can coach you through that. And to be able to help you find the answers and then make this plan. When I say plan, you know, like, what are we going to change about what we're eating? And, you know, what are we going to, you know, I'm thinking that, you know, you have this huge rash every time you have dairy and you have type 1, maybe that dairy is contributing to your problem. So, you know, maybe we just need to take out dairy, or, you know, or checking out the house, you know, like, yes, we have mold right in my child's, you know, bathroom, like right in that shower. And you know what, Sutton, we found that as well. And that was later, like that was way after we chased down all the other stuff. You know, that's when we dealt with the diet, and then we dealt with the, you know, all these other issues we dealt with, like, you know, the GABA levels in her brain. And you know, there were so many things that we had already done. And then we find mold in the bathroom. It's like, what? You know, so all of those things, you just really, it is investigative work. But that's why I do what I do, Sutton, because I know where to look, and then it saves people years of this kind of heartache, you know, and it's hard. And then, you know, and then it doesn't have to be hard, right? It just has to be like a challenge, but it doesn't have to be where it's like impossible. Yeah. And can I say one thing about what we were saying about reversal?
Yeah.
I find like talking about reversal can be dangerous. It just can be, because and I use that word, but I don't ever use like the word cure, and really, because cure actually means, I mean, to me, it's like a pill for that one ill. We cured diabetes. Well, diabetes type 1 isn't just one thing. It's not just like you get through this blood test and you've got the diabetes bug or whatever it is, the one thing that causes diabetes. There's no such thing. I mean, it's multifactorial, and one kid's diabetes is caused by a totally different thing or combination of things, which is total load, basically, is what we look at. What are the total things, and then the straw that broke the camel's back. Then another child, it's totally different. Every kid is different. And again, we have the usual suspects, but then we have to find out what combination of those usual suspects caused that particular child's situation. And then that's what we do, is we deal with all of them in a specific order. And then the body has the chance to go, oh, I'm not in the state of inflammation anymore. Now it's time to repair. That's where we see like the real stuff happen. So I never use the word cure, because there is no cure. I never talk about, like, there's no cure for type 1. There are cures, maybe, or they're not even cures. There are methods toward health. There's a step-by-step kind of plan. There's a philosophy, I guess you could even say, to your approach, right? And then when we talk about reversal, I was saying that, it's sort of like, it's hard to talk about, because people are, it's a very emotional time to deal with a chronic illness. It gets, people hope, and then they're like, but then what if it goes wrong, or nobody talks about this? And I mean, if you look at the science, it's really clear. It's really clear in the immunology world what's actually happening with autoimmunity. They're doing so much good work. And I feel like right now, myself, I'm right at the very, I would say I'm at the beginning. I'm 8 years into this, but I'm at the very beginning of actually working with clients, because we've been working sometimes like for a while, but it takes a long time, and it's very much a process. But it's okay, because if you go into it going, well, if you don't go into it saying, I'm going to reverse my child's type 1 in a week, well, that's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. It's okay. If your child has diabetes, they have diabetes. It's fine. But the point is to improve and improve and improve and improve and improve and improve. And it's a process. So it's not a yes or no. It's more like a gradient. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like every autoimmune diagnosis, now you know that even if there is reversal of symptoms or reversal of it entirely, you're kind of always susceptible to that. So that's why cure doesn't really apply, because cure indicates that you'll never get it again.
Right.
Or to a certain degree, but you have to realize that, okay, now I'm susceptible to this particular autoimmune condition. I've got it in remission, or I've got it under control. Yep. And, it's a lifelong dedication that you have to stick to it. You can't fall back on ways that got you there to begin with, whatever it is, if it's diet, exposure to toxins. I wanted to mention stress load.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, with all autoimmune, stress is a massive factor, and it can totally sabotage a healing process. And just realizing that you need to have balance and keep your stress in check as part of that whole process as well. And it like you were saying, I mean, it kind of falls under the autoimmune category that applies to everything. I did want to ask you, is there any like special considerations about type 1 diabetes that makes it unique to other autoimmune conditions that you didn't discuss yet?
Yeah, actually there are, and they're probably ones that you wouldn't even suspect. But I just want to second what you said about stress, Sutton. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Stress is like if you're talking about pulling the trigger, that's a trigger puller right there. And we just really underestimate the detrimental effects of stress, over stress, right? Like not just use stress where you're like, it's supposed to be a little stress sometimes, but this whole fight or flight, freeze, faint, right? Like there's that's huge. It's huge. And chronic illness can cause stress, more stress. It's like it's a perpetuation of the disease process because you're already unwell, and then you're stressed because you're unwell, and you're stressed because you're trying to get well, and we're stressed. And then also the stress is not only mental, emotional, which it is, but it's also like the physical stressors. So we put those things all together, and they're all stress. They all create inflammation. So I totally agree. I think, but yeah, you hear about moms all the time. Like, I didn't have Hashimoto's till after I had my kid. Well, yeah, there's a correlation to the hormone changes for sure, but also to the stress of being a new mom. Or it's massive. And so maybe that will lead into talking about, hello, right? Yes. So maybe that will lead us into talking about these special attributes. Well, actually, no, that would lead, yeah. Okay, so type 1 is, all chronic illness is very, can create a lot of mental, emotional issues for children. We're just talking about children for now. For sure everybody in the population, but children, let's say. And then especially teens as well. That's even, I think, harder because your teenagers aren't your little gaggle of ducks following you around anymore. They are trying to become independent people, and rightly so. And that's their right. That's their time to do it. And it's kind of like it's stolen from them when they have a chronic illness because there's someone in their business all the time. There's someone checking up on them all the time. They can't make the mistakes other kids can have because some kids, it's life and death. Type 1 is life and death. So you've got a child, you've got a teenager who's experimenting with their lives and wanting to go and out in the world, and the world tells them that this is okay and that's okay, and we all eat a bunch of junk when we're teenagers, and we all get cranky when we're teenagers, and we don't sleep when we're teenagers, and that is like, that's life and death for at least. It could be immediate, but it is down the road actually really detrimental to their health. 5 years down the road, or if they make one mistake. Right? And parents listening know this. I'm not just telling parents to scare them. Every one of the parents listening here that has a child with type 1 has thought of this. Their kid makes a mistake, or they make a mistake, they could die. That's a special consideration because, even with cancer, you're not going to die today if you forget to take your supplements, if you don't do your CBD oil, if you don't, take your curcumin or whatever you need to do for that day. If you don't take your insulin, that's it. Right? If you take too much, right? So, and I know people who've been in that situation where their kids have been in and out of the hospital. Fortunately, we haven't had that. We haven't had a bunch of hospital emergencies, but lots of times, this happens all the time. So that's a special consideration with type 1. And, all these other diseases can kind of like, they slowly, but also with type 1, it can be immediate, but also the effects are also long-term. So if you have high blood sugar or the roller coaster, that is damaging to the organs over time. So there's those two things that those kids and their parents have to handle every single day, knowing this. So, it's like a daily practice of being in the now and enjoying your life and, meditating parents of kids who have chronic illness at all. And you parents who have type 1, kids who have type 1, I highly recommend it. Addressing your own mental state, your own meditative practice is, I think, essential. I think that's what kept me going with, and not just going like I had to like survive my life. I love my life. I love my life. I love my children. I could do without diabetes. Let's admit it. Okay, it's changed so many things. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for my daughter. But I would probably trade it all if she didn't have it. So I don't know. I can't really say that, but I'm not going to say I love, but that was all bad or that's all good. It just is, right? That's the thing. It just is. But so that's a special consideration that it's life and death. It's a long term, but it also can happen very quickly. And also things like comorbidities. So I think, you mentioned that at the beginning of this interview, Sutton, and some of these are special not special, but they kind of come hand in hand with type 1. And that's like, we're talking about neuropathy, right? Like, if we're talking about nerve damage, eye damage, that's, doesn't come along with every single chronic illness, but it does, especially with type 1, because we're talking about a toxic level of blood sugar. And also, like, so some kids are actually, they have a hard time like keeping weight on, but sometimes if you have like double diabetes, so if you have both the metabolic as well as the autoimmune, which a lot of kids do, they can actually have trouble with weight gain, mental and emotional issues. So we're looking at like depression, and I don't just mean a little bit, like it could be severe, and just like, and then what do you do with a child who has type 1 diabetes and depressed, because you're trying to motivate them to take care of themselves, which they don't care. They don't care. So that's another issue. So that's really, really important, why we need to address their environment, the root causes, because it actually affects their ability to take care of themselves. If they don't want to, then they're not going to control their blood sugar, and then they have all those other problems, right? So we have to feed them well. We have to get them well in their minds as well. So we're talking depression. I mean, anxiety is another one. A lot of these kids have low GABA, high glutamate in the brain because of the effects of blood sugar, the toxic sugar has on those neurochemicals. So we really want to, again, it comes down to diet and environment as well. And then some kids actually, they have something called diabulimia. So diabulimia is actually where, and this was new to me about 2 years ago when I watched this documentary about it. I was twigged onto it by someone who told me about it in a type 1 a Facebook group, actually. And I watched this film, and it was about these kids who don't actually don't dial enough insulin, or they don't take it at certain times, or they don't take enough purposefully so they can lose weight. So it's an eating disorder that goes along with having type 1 diabetes, which is severely dangerous. It's super dangerous, yes. And it's not all that uncommon, but we haven't named it. We haven't given it a label. So it's sort of going under the wire or the radar. So that's another comorbidity. A lot of kids can have things like other autoimmune conditions, like we were talking about. Very commonly coming together with type 1 is celiac disease. Very common, and one could lead to the other would lead to the one, and they're like kissing cousins. Like if I first thing I say, I said we look at dairy, that's one thing, right? But I also look at gluten for sure. Like with every single child who has type 1, don't eat the gluten. It's not worth it. You don't even need to test. You can test if you want, but you need to get a proper test, by the way, like not just like any old. You need a really good comprehensive test from a good reputable lab. And I have my labs that I like to work with. People can poke in and ask me, and I'll let you know what that is. But for sure, gluten is quite often an issue. And so food sensitivities and reactivity. So those things can actually, quite often kids who have type 1 have things that they can't eat or that bother them. They have skin conditions, like bumpy arms, which indicates, basically nutrient deficiencies, and also like that mask, like the lupus mask. Okay, so and a lot of kids who have type 1, some of them can develop lupus or also have lupus, and then thyroid problems is another one of those things that can come along with type 1 diabetes. There's something else PANDAS, PANS, and autoimmune encephalitis, which is an autoimmune reaction to brain tissue caused by an infection. So PANDAS, with the S in the end, means strep. And then some PANS is actually just could be other infection, like perhaps Lyme or Epstein-Barr or something like that, some kind of other infection that will create this autoimmune condition in the brain. So that's because that's on the rise actually right now. So and there was a few other things that I wanted to mention, but I can't actually remember. But yeah, so these things that's why I say, like, we don't have to panic about wow, my child is going to have miscarriages when she gets older because of her diabetes, or she's going to have Alzheimer's when she, we don't have to panic about that because there's not one fix for each one. So we're not looking at all these different things that we have to deal with. We're really just dealing with one thing and preventing all the rest, right? So we're starting with the basics, and then we're finding the root causes, addressing those, and then having a plan, a healing plan. So that's what's really exciting about that, Sutton, is that all of those things, you will not have to deal with those things down the road so this is actually the most convenient, the most exciting thing to know. This is exciting, I think.
Yeah. Something that I just feel like with all autoimmune conditions, gluten and dairy just need to be, automatic. Like don't even pray, don't even need to test. I mean, it's just this continuous thing that we see. It's they definitely, those two things play a huge role diet wise. And
Can I add two things? Well, actually a couple. So if you're talking about diet, like I would also look at anything GMO. No GMO. No. And if you can't, I mean, actually, preferably all organic. Every single thing you eat is organic. And especially if you can't get it organic, it needs to be non-GMO. Don't be eating that GMO corn or soy. Those are like, don't eat GMO corn, don't eat GMO soy. Yeah. Okay. I had to add those.
Yeah, for sure. Second that. No, yeah. So specifically, like when you're working with somebody with type 1 diabetes or child with type 1 diabetes, how do you support not only like that child through their process, but also the parents and siblings that have to live with a household member that have type 1 diabetes, because it affects the whole house, on every level. I mean, whatever you buy at the grocery store, making sure that person is healthy and supported all the time. I can imagine, like you're saying, anxiety sometimes is a comorbidity because it's kind of like you're always like on heightened awareness of like how you feel and how your child feels, or even if it's a sibling, like an older sibling that always has to check in on their younger sibling who might have diabetes. So like, how do you work with the whole family on this journey of being diagnosed and living with type 1 diabetes?
Okay. You know what? I'm going to do this again to you because I keep doing this. I keep thinking of something that I forgot to answer in the previous question. So I'm going to do that one more time before I answer this next question. Okay. So I have to add to comorbidities, because when you were asking that question, it made me think of like special circumstances and stuff like that. And also like mood, right? So often, what happens with kids with type 1, they can have these mood fluctuations because if you've ever felt hangry where you need to eat, like that's actually the body is like, and the stress response, we want to talk about that, Sutton, is where, your body's like, I'm starving. Like it's like, I'm starving. I'm like panicking. I'm mean. I'm cranky. I'm disrespectful. I can't think. Like, you're not at school going, I think I'll do my math now. No, you're not. So, I mean, that roller coaster is like, that's what's happening there with those kids. And also, mental, emotional. Yeah. So the blood sugar causing that. There's something else now. Darn it. Anyway, but so that's one thing I really wanted to mention. Oh, and learning disabilities. So it can look like this child has a learning disability, can't think, ADHD kind of behavior, but it could actually be because of the blood sugar fluctuations and just not being able to think, and always being in that state of inflammation. Brain inflammation is not a nice thing. So just wanted to mention those couple of things. All right, so how do you support them? How do I support them?
Now you got me thinking really quick. So that reminded me the hangry example, because when I am eating regular amounts of carbohydrates, and then when I transition over to ketogenic diet, I've done it a few times and it's really beneficial to me. That painful kind of like hungry feeling that you get like when you're consuming probably too many carbohydrates on a regular basis, you might wake up with this like hollowness in your stomach that you just kind of can feel your stomach eating itself. It's like this kind of
Oh yeah.
uncomfortable, hungry. When you transition into keto, that totally goes away. It's like that doesn't even exist on that kind of diet. Do you ever recommend, because I know there's no one size fits all diet for anyone, but do you ever recommend trying out a ketogenic diet when somebody has type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, actually I do. You know, and with really close monitoring and talking to parents, and like, I mean, there's like everywhere from the gamut of like people saying, oh, keto is dangerous and you should never do that with a child. And that's like ketoacidosis is totally different. Ketoacidosis is not nutritional ketosis. They are different. They are different. Do not equate the two. Okay. So let's just be very clear about that. We did keto. My daughter in particular, right now she's not really wanting to do that. And so it really is, it's not the easiest diet for children. Even teenagers can do it. Depends how dedicated they are and where they're at, you know, like in their own journey, because this is really their own journey as well, which is really hard for us parents to accept, that our kids have their own agenda and their own journey, even though they might not have the brain development that we have to really make the best decisions all the time. But it doesn't mean they don't make good ones sometimes or most of the time, or depending on the kid. So, you know, I think that, but for as far as that diet, yeah, I think that it's possible. It needs to be a very healthy ketogenic diet. I have a book even behind me. I can't remember the author, but he wrote the keto diet for type 1 diabetes, I think is what it's called. Look that up and give it a read. Make sure you get really well informed about the diet itself, what it does, you know, biochemically, I guess, within the body. I would just make sure that you have like a high vegetable keto diet. Like a lot of people just don't even eat vegetables on keto. Like they're like so, you know, very focused on keeping the carbs down that they eat like, you know, like maybe a cucumber that's like, it's good, but it's mostly water. And you kind of need like some of those those very colorful vegetables to kind of like, you know, fill in all of those nutrients, the need for those nutrients. So I would really be careful about that. Make sure that there's a lot of vegetables, and a lot of like, you know, the rainbow, right? And then the fat is actually like the amount of fat is what actually puts you into ketosis, which you probably know because you've done this before. I would even play with cycling in and out of ketosis, because that's said to be very beneficial. And, you know, it's kind of a lot to get into in this talk in particular, but we're looking at ATP production and the mitochondrial health as being like, you know, key to cellular repair, right? To cellular energy, to you know, being able to have the energy to repair, and not only that, but to also live your life and to think and to breathe and to, you know, exercise and everything. It's like the life of the cell. So when you are in ketosis, that actually is very good for the mitochondria, and which are little organelles that live inside each cell. So we want that because they're producing our energy, they're producing our ATP. And so that cycling in and out would be beneficial. But also you can do like, I mean, intermittent fasting. I mean, if you have kids, like they don't have to fast for like 24 hours, but you know, you guys could skip breakfast, you know, try that, have a little bit of, you know, fat in the morning, like a cup of, or even just like a cup of meat stock or something in the morning that has no carbs or something, but something really nourishing, and just do that for that first meal of the day. It's like a stellar breakfast, and they still have something to eat. They still feel really good and nourished. You're fixing their gut lining, but then you don't get this hit of carbs just before you go to toddle off to whatever you're doing during the day. So I think that is a really nice way to do that. That's not so restrictive for younger people. Just watch, just make sure that you have all the nutrients you need, but you don't need, you know, copious amounts of carbs. You don't really, some people say you don't even really need carbs at all because your body can turn, you know, the protein or fat into the right proper fuel, right? So, but mostly fat. Yeah, so I think that it's definitely a contender. And I've seen it work with a lot. Actually, when my daughter was on a ketogenic diet, we had very good results, very good. And I was trying to get her to try it again. So we're going to see that, you know, just to see how much further we can go with this, you know. But yeah, so I think it's a beneficial diet. And I think at the very least, though, you start with the whole foods diet. And I really don't think, I actually would go even paleo, because I don't think we really need those grains that are really high in carbs anyway. But then there's sort of like the kind of issues like, well, black beans are really good for you and they've got a lot of the XYZ and they've got lots of fiber. Well, if you want to sprinkle some on there, like, it's just that we need to be getting away from that whole half the plate, like super high carbs, and then like a sprinkling of all the rest. No, we need to have mostly, good quality fats, lots of like vegetables. And then just like, if you want a sprinkling of like black beans or something on your taco salad or something like that, then, that's okay. Like, okay. So yes, but to get into ketosis though, you do need to get to the sweet spot. Like, you can't just be like, oh, I have too many carbs. Oops. Like you have to actually get to the sweet spot. So you really have to find out what that is for your kids too. You can check for ketones. There are ketone checkers. Like we have a glucometer that also checks for ketones, which it's not dangerous to have ketones. What's dangerous is if your child is sick with ketoacidosis. That's dangerous. So yes, I'd say do it just like anything else. Go with your eyes wide open and you make sure you do your due diligence and read all you can about it before you actually do it. And while you're doing it, you just be smart and you say, how are you feeling? Like if your child's blood sugars are going wonky, you're checking all the time anyway. It's not like it's going to go too far or something like that and you're going to have a problem. You just be smart and watch.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. I was just curious. That came to mind, that particular diet. Okay, so full circle, because we got off topic to the diet again, which is huge with type 1 diabetes. So it is very important to talk about diet. But again, like, what are some ways that you believe is beneficial to support the whole family when there's an individual in the household that has diabetes?
Okay, yeah. I like, this is what I tell everybody with a child who has any chronic illness, is that the whole family's affected, like you said. And that's why I like to work with whole families. And we might start off with their child, but then it's always, the parents come into play, the siblings, always, because, like you said, sometimes the siblings have more, responsibility, sometimes less, and that's not always a good thing. And there's so many dynamics that are happening there. Most of the time the parents are fairly stressed, and right, like understandably so. And so we have to, address their health as well. So, what I try to help people to do is sort of change the mindset around an illness, right? Change the mindset around type 1, change the mindset around whatever their child has, because the last thing we want to do is feel like this kid's sick. We got a sick kid and we've got this person has to take care of them, and this person, they can't do anything. So these ones all have to, there's resentment, there's despair, there's hopelessness, there's frustration, all these things. And it's okay. Like, this is going to happen, but we need to address that and recognize it for what it is. Because if we can start thinking about things a little differently, and especially take control over the things that are happening within our environments, like better food, like we're going to turn off the Wi-Fi, we're going to play family game nights, we're all going to make these changes together. Because it's not just like, so often I'll see, like, let's say a little one, they're like 6 or something, and they have this special diet, or 8 or 10 or whatever. And then mom and dad are like giving this special diet to the other child, and everybody else is eating everything else. So they're singled out. And second, they don't get to have what everybody else has. So their special diet is really a diet of deprivation, because they don't get to do what everybody else gets to do, right? So that the whole mindset goes like that. Then you have food wars, which is like, you do not want to have food wars because you don't always win, because it's just not fun. And so and then also, everybody else feels like they can do whatever they want because they're fine. But it's not fine, because if they're all eating all this other stuff, they have a higher chance of being sick themselves. And, and they will be, because of what's going on with our food supply and our environment. They just will. So this is the opportunity. This is not a plague. This is not a, why me? This is your opportunity to take your whole family into a new direction. And so when you see it that way, you're making meals together, you're cooking together, you're shopping together, going, hey, look, did you read that label? Can you read that? Tell me if that's whatever's in that label. Your kids are helping out with that. It's a total shift in how we view this particular situation, this particular challenge, if we go through it as a family. And then also, one thing I would say for sure is never tell that child, like let them get away with not doing anything. Oh, they don't have to do the dishes because so and so is just like they can't reach, or they're like they can't because they're too tired. Well, I think that every child should be pushed, nudged into doing the best that they can. If it's, if they're a little sicker, like some kids are really not feeling well, they're hurting, and that's okay if they do less, but they should still do something. They still need to have purpose. It's good for everybody, including them, actually, especially them, because they still feel they're needed, and that their contribution makes a difference in their family. And then the siblings aren't going to be, resented, like, Johnny doesn't have to do the dishes. Why do I always have to do the dishes? And Johnny just sits there and just like, just because he's sick, and no, we don't want that. And then mom and dad, whoever's there, grandpa, grandma, whoever the caregiver is, that's another thing that we really focus on, is making sure, they're getting what they need to. They're not getting sick, that they're present. I know if I'm not feeling well, I'm a crappy mom. I'm not a good mom at all. Like, not at all. And I'm like, where did that come from? And why did you say that? And like, just what? I'm like, cuckoo, cray, cray. And so we need to take care of ourselves.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I know that you're probably much harder on yourself than what other people perceive you as, because I know that when I'm feeling like a crappy mom, I'm still probably a pretty decent mom, but we tend to be harder on ourselves, because we do want to be the best for our kids. I just love everything you just said about that, because, as you know, I'm getting my marriage and family therapy medical specialty license, and like all of that was like spot on, because what we need to make sure that the individual feels is that they are not their disease, and that they are their own person.
Yep.
And they have to live and manage, the cards that have been dealt to them, but to do so in a way that, like you're saying, it doesn't allow them to escape life. Because if we play into I'm the disease, and I don't know myself outside of the disease, you're essentially escaping life. You're limiting your fun, you're not participating in things, isolating yourself, you're depressed, you're putting yourself in a closet. And to get the whole family on board, and to encourage, especially a child, to kind of take ownership of their own identity outside of their disease, and like you were saying, give them purpose, and that helps build their self-esteem, and all of that allows them to feel more confident and in control of their disease, and for them to say, I trust myself in knowing how to pick up on signs and symptoms, fluctuations in how I feel. And I know that kids are very, very smart in their process of manipulating, family members by saying, well, I'm too sick, I can't do that. Well, no, we know you're not sick. Let's do this, So everything you just said there was powerful, and it's exactly how I want to work with people in an integrative way. And the whole family, and getting everybody on board is so powerful. Like you said, if everybody doesn't get on board, they're going to end up getting sick their own way. Something's going to happen to them, but if everybody can buy into the idea that this is an opportunity, like you said, for everybody to get well, and to be on the same boat, it's just the best way to approach the situation. And I just love that you said all of that. And I don't know if there's anything else that you feel that you really want to speak about regarding type 1 diabetes. You've covered an amazing bit of content, but here's your opportunity if you feel like you might have left something out.
I left so much out. It's not even funny. But I mean, we'd be here all day. I taught a weekend workshop that had 12 sessions, an hour and a half each. So no, I mean, I just want to say one thing. I love what you said. I love what you're going to be doing out there in the world, Sutton. But I do have one thing I want to say about the plan and treatments and stuff like that. Again, I just want to say that the solutions are multifactorial. So the causes are multifactorial, but so are the solutions. And so they kind of go into every sort of aspect of our lives that we've been talking about here. Like we're talking about environment, what do all those things mean? But also, I really want parents to kind of really look into things that are not conventional as well, that are super powerful. And I'm talking things like essential oils. I'm talking about things like homeopathy. Beautiful. Homeopathy works deep. And those are the people that are talking about remission and stuff. Those are the ones that they know that they can do these things using tools that we don't really even recognize or even understand. So in mainstream. So I've been doing a lot of work with homeopathy. And also things like cold laser therapy. We've got someone talking about that on the summit as well, Dr. Kirk Gare. And and massage and, craniosacral, getting the issues in the tissues, right? So those things that will work on the central nervous system, which is huge. The central nervous system is huge in disease. And so there are just so many things. I mean, there are many, many things, avenues, ways to access healing. And it's not just a bunch of people think of natural medicine as a bunch of herbal pills and vitamins. And well, okay, there's some of that, but that's not even close to being everything. So I feel learning a lot, what I've learned is that, there are certain things that are the heavy hitters is what I call them. So we got the usual suspects for causes, and we got the heavy hitters for the healing. So yeah, I just wanted to say that there are many, many things to do and so many really cool things to explore. And anyway, so I just wanted to say that, and I want to thank you, Sutton, for an amazing interview. This was really great. I feel like we really did cover a lot of stuff. So thanks so much for being part of the interviewing staff or lineup for the Children's Health Summit 4, and for taking the time and taking on the challenge. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor. Thank you for asking. I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad we figured out a time that we could do it. And what you're doing, I'm just so excited to be apprenticing with you and be able to pick your brain. You're so accessible and you're so passionate about what you do. And I feel like I won the lottery as far as having the best mentor to help me be the best practitioner I can be when I'm working with people. Thank you.
Aw, thank you, Sutton. I promise I didn't tell her to say that. Okay, thank you so much. All right, see you at the summit. Have a good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and be sure to listen to more interviews from this timely and groundbreaking series. If you would like more information, guidance, and support through your family's health journey, and or want to join our growing community of professionally trained family health coaches, please visit us at healthyfamilyformula.com. Together, we can turn the tide for the future health of our children. May you and your families be well.